Humans ring more bells in American sports than the man they called the Papa Bear. George Halas was not only the founder, coach, and even a player of the Chicago Bears. The NFL as we know it would not exist if not for him and the work of just a few other men in taking professional football out of the barnstorming days and into our living rooms. It was not a glamorous beginning for the game of pigskin, but modern American football does have a beginning, and it can be traced back over 100 years ago. Hello there, if this is your first time checking us out, thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. I am Hookshot Drew, and today we'll be diving into this incredible pioneer and the impact the Chicago Bears had on this incredible sport. If you like this type of content, please be sure to like this video. Thank you. Like many other families during the turn of the 20th century, George was born into a large, hard-working American family. His brothers were all athletes and extremely competitive. George was a three-sport star. While he was a star pitcher and pretty good at basketball, he actually had terrible luck with injuries in football and didn't play much until his senior season. The Halas family were Chicago bred, and thus George not only attended high school in Chicago, but also college, as he attended the University of Illinois, where he pitched for the baseball team, played basketball, and played football. Despite his excellence in football later in his career and life, he had some tough luck in his early ongoing. Halas was extremely slight in his high school days. He graduated high school at 130 pounds. Tough injuries and poor timing led him to have a largely forgettable high school and start to his college career in football, but George excelled in baseball as a pitcher, earning the spot at Illinois on its own. Perhaps his crowning achievement for the Illini was his buzzer-beating shot to beat Wisconsin for the Big Ten championship in basketball. On July 24, 1915, George Halas died in a capsized boat tragedy along with everyone else on board, or at least that's what the papers reported. Halas's fraternity brothers came into the Halas house to deliver the news to his family and were astonished when George answered the door. Halas had purchased a ticket, but he missed his sally out when his brother asked him to step on the scale to see if the bulking Halas had gained any weight. Imagine just how different football would be if George truly passed away in that horrific tragedy. Prior to his senior year, George enlisted in the Navy for World War I and attended the Great Lakes Naval Academy in Chicago. This guy never seemed to leave the city, where he played basketball and baseball as well as football, whom he also coached. His older brother, Walter Halas, became an accomplished coach on his own. He was the baseball and basketball coach at Notre Dame, where he was assistant football coach to the legendary Knute Rockne, whom they essentially ran the athletic department together at Notre Dame. George's senior season at the Naval Academy was a success, and George thought he was done with football forever once he graduated. George never saw any combat during World War I, something that ate at him for quite some time. The New York Yankees came a-calling after scouting him throughout his high school and college days, employing him as a fielder for the 1919 season. He was eventually called down to the minors in favor of a guy named Babe Ruth, and after George didn't get a contract he wanted from another baseball team, he decided to leave baseball for good after the Yankees asked him to take a sizable pay cut. George signed with the semi-pro Hammond Pros in 1920, playing against the legendary Jim Thorpe and the Canton Bulldogs for his very first pro game. Owners of the Staley Starch Company approached George to run their company's athletic department. As mentioned in our George Mikan video, it was common at the time for companies to run their own sports teams and have barnstorming tours with other companies or organized city teams. Halas was given full control of the team and immediately set to work signing players such as George Trafton, a Hall of Famer and a brash, loudmouth drinker who was known for bar brawling. Trafton would have an infamous fight with MLBer Arthur Briles, which was set up by the bookies and the Chicago Mafia. The fight was widely publicized, but it didn't live up to the billing. Both fighters were out of gas after the second round, and a riot started when spectators grew bored of the tired-out fighters just standing around and talking to their corner repeatedly. This was the 20s after all. People were boozing, throwing money around, and wanted to be entertained right now. We're not so different these days, are we? The pro game, just as in the case of George Mikan in pro basketball, was looked at as crude and inferior to the college game. A lot of people carried the sentiment that men shouldn't be paid to play football, and as a result, a lot of top-shelf players didn't end up playing professional football. In truth, pro football was very loose and dependent on barnstorming in order to make money. There was no football leagues, and teams frequently folded just as quickly as they sprouted up. George Halas was the man who had an idea. A unified, organized league at the top teams in America, which each team paying a fee to join. This would give the league some capital to organize itself and the teams. A meeting was set up between the 11 biggest teams, and the first meeting took place in a car garage. The new league was named the American Pro Football Association, the predecessor to the NFL. Jim Thorpe was chosen as the first league president. The charter teams were the Akron Pros, the Canton Bulldogs, the Cleveland Tigers, the Dayton Triangles, the Decatur Staleys, the Hammond Pros, the Massillon Tigers, the Muncie Flyers, the Racine Cardinals, the Rochester Jeffersons, and the Rock Island Independents. Of those teams, only the Racine Cardinals and the Decatur Staleys exist today. Right out of the gate, the Staleys, led by Halas, were a good team, finishing the 1920 season with just one loss to the Racine Cardinals, whom they had a rematch a week later after the loss and won. They went on to tie the undefeated Akron Pros in the 1920 NFL Championship 0-0. Imagine waiting to watch the final two teams play only to see them tie. This was the only playoff game at the time too. To show up to a game to see neither team score probably would have not been a great thing to happen to a brand new league, but they weathered this storm with seemingly no issues. Yet. After the season, the Staley Starch Company laid off their athletic department due to an economic recession that hit the company fairly hard. The company generously gave Halas the football team and some starting capital in exchange for keeping the team's name as the Staleys for one more year. Halas was a huge fan of the Chicago Cubs baseball team and thought of naming his team the Cubs after he was able to secure Wrigley Field for his team. However, he decided on the Bears after he reasoned that football players were larger than baseball players. Halas had certainly an eye for talent, but paying for good players and renting an expensive field like Wrigley was eating into profits. Throughout the early 20s, the Bears struggled financially. That all changed with the arrival of the Ghost. It was also George's idea to have football games on Sunday, as the working men of America worked 6 days a week with Sundays off. Halas reasoned that if he could get the working man and their families to come watch football on their days off, they'd be in business. Well, they're still playing Sundays over 100 years later, so he was clearly onto something. To say George had his finger on the pulse was an understatement, but at the same time, some of his hunches were sort of on the obvious side. For instance, him noticing the greatest football player of the time may not have been that difficult, since Red Grange was a 3-time All-American, the first ever unanimous All-American, at Halas' own alma mater, the University of Illinois. The Galloping Ghost became a mythological folk hero in the annals of American sports, a name that still holds significance today, even if 90% of football fans today probably haven't even seen a single highlight of his. Grange was a charter member of both the College and Pro Football Hall of Fame. To say he was significant to the time period would be a monumental understatement. It wasn't as simple as calling up Grange and asking him to play for the Bears. This was 1920s America, and it had its views on players that were being paid to play football. Grange's own college coach nearly begged him not to play pro football. Grange rebuffed Halas a few times throughout the 1925 season, but he finally had his man to paper after C.C. Pyle, Grange's shrewd manager and promoter, guaranteed him earning over $100,000 in a barnstorming tour after the final 2 games of the Bears season. Grange waited until his final game to join the Bears, but his class had not yet graduated. This angered the Illinois AD, and George Halas agreed that this would not be good for the college ranks going forward. A rule was implemented that college players cannot go pro until their class graduated. This would be known as a Red Grange rule. Red Grange was given the nickname the Galloping Ghost by writer Grantland Rice, who said the swift and elusive Grange left a vapor trail when he ran. The game that solidified Grange into the pantheon of history was University of Illinois versus University of Michigan, October 18, 1924. Illinois hadn't lost in 10 games, Michigan in 20. Grange hammered the Wolverines from the opening gun, taking a kickoff more than 90 yards for a touchdown on the first play of the game, his first of 4 touchdowns in just the first quarter. Grange set out the entire second quarter, but that didn't stop him from finishing with 402 rushing yards and 5 scores, along with a passing touchdown, as Illinois crushed Michigan 39-14. Grange had dominated what was considered to be a perfect defense and put himself on the map as one of the country's truly great athletes. To say the Bears got publicity with the signing of Grange is a massive understatement. Notice I said publicity, as it wasn't all good publicity. Nearly the entirety of college football was in lockstep with the notion that players shouldn't be paid to play football, and they were especially peeved about Grange leaving school early to play what they considered a lowbrow and seedy sport like professional football. Pyle and Halas had a plan to make Grange an even bigger star, but more importantly, a player for the Bears. Pyle and Halas set to work putting together a grueling barnstorming tour for 1925, with Grange playing for the Bears for the last 2 games of the NFL season before taking part in the tour. The tour was a massive success, with nearly every game sold out. Pyle made good on his promise to Grange that he'd get $100K from the barnstorming tour. The rumors of the day say he netted over $250,000 from the tour, and Halas' Bears were saved from certain financial fate. With the publicity of having Grange on the Bears, and after playing the New York Giants in NYC, a very new NFL team, the Bears were invited to the White House to meet the President of the United States, Calvin Coolidge. Coolidge greeted them by saying, "I've always been a big fan of Animal Acts," clearly not with it when it came to pro football. The barnstorming tour of 1925 was a massive success, but it was also heavily taxing on the bodies of the Bears, in particular the star player, one Red Grange. Pyle, the shrewd promoter and manager of Grange, may have been the primary one behind the massive promotion of Grange and the savior of the Bears, but he'd also be very responsible for the downfall of Grange, or at least some of it. Pyle convinced Grange to leave the Bears in the NFL and to create their own league, with Grange being the top drawing card. They set out just to do that, and although the New York Yankees football team with Red Grange would draw larger crowds, the rest of the league could not hack it financially and folded. The new league came and went in less than a year. Grange faced public scrutiny like never before and felt extremely alone. In 1927, the NFL granted the New York Yankees membership into the league in order to get access to Grange. I don't think they would allow anything remotely close to this to happen again, but let me know in the comments, would you think that they would allow a star player to leave, create his own league, and then come back into the league with the team that he made up? Let me know. The very same season, however, in 27 against the Bears, Red Grange would take a vicious hit from none other than the Bears' George Halas, instantly shredding his knee, tearing the ACL, MCL, cartilage, and tendons. With Grange writhing on the field in pain, Crafton felt bad about hurting his friend and carried him off the field. The hit by Crafton would rob the 24-year-old Red Grange of his amazing cutting ability and elusiveness. There were no surgeries at the time to fix his knee. Grange felt his career was over. Grange sat out the entire 28 season and was certain his athletic career was over. That was until his phone rang, and on the other end was aboard George Halas. "I can't cut anymore, George. The ghost is dead. You can't gallop, but by God, you can still play football." Bronko Nagurski was born to Ukrainian parents and was raised to be a tough, hard-working young man by being raised on a farm in icy cold Canada. He was given the nickname Bronko when a school teacher realized no one in his school could pronounce Bronko. Bronko itself was a fairly common name in Ukraine, so Bronko took the name. Bronko developed a hulking body from an early age from working hard on the family farm, and thus always got attention from coaches in school to play sports. His parents were entrepreneurs who turned their small town into a bustling community whose economy greatly improved with the introduction of the Nagurskis. It was from his family's farm and his own hard work that he got the attention of Minnesota's Doc Spears, who drove to the family farm and noticed his physique. Spears was known for telling tall tales and started the rumor that he saw Bronko pick up the 800-pound plow to point where the family farmhouse was located. This wasn't true, however, but when people saw Bronko run through defenders, his massive muscles pumping like pistons with every step, they were inclined to believe Doc Spears. Doc Spears found himself a Paul Bunyan football player, and he wasn't leaving without the Bronco. From the moment he stepped on the practice field at the University of Minnesota, Nagurski dominated, even despite Coach Spears stacking the deck against him to test his moxie. Freshmen weren't eligible to play, but that had stopped the Bronco from shredding his poor teammates in practice. Many hadn't won in many years, but with the coach Doc Spears, fullback Herb Justing, and future sophomore Bronko Nagurski, that was all about to change. For the 1927 season, Doc Spears knew he had a strong Minnesota Gopher squad. With a powerful offensive line and two great backs in Justing and Nagurski, college football was about to be put on notice. The team blew out North Dakota and Oklahoma State and tied Indiana. They blanked Iowa 38-0 and then beat Wisconsin. The hype on campus for the undefeated Gophers grew to a fever pitch when the team traveled to South Bend to play Newt Rockney's Fighting Irish football team that hadn't lost or tied at home in 22 years. The locker rooms of both home and away teams were underneath the field in those days and sat next to each other, sharing a wall. Coach Spears was about to start his pregame speech when through the wall he heard the booming voice of Rockney addressing his team. "Boys, we have not lost a game in this stadium in 22 years. That's right, 22 years, and you're not going to lose today. Take the game to those fellas and you'll come away winners. Fight, fight, fight. Win it today for old Notre Dame." When Rockney finished, Spears stood up and shrugged his shoulders. "Boys, you heard what the man had to say. Now get out there and win one for old Minnesota." The team was instantly charged up, maybe too charged up. A nervous Gopher player fumbled the snap, which was recovered by Notre Dame and punched in a few plays later for a touchdown. However, the Gophers clamped up and didn't allow Notre Dame to score the rest of the day. The game was smash-mouth football, trading defensive stands until late in the fourth quarter, with the Notre Dame defense worn down. Justing ran 4 straight times with Nagurski's elite blocker, knocking the Irish down like bowling pins, clearing the way for his teammates. They scored on the drive and the game ended 7-7. For the first time in over 2 decades, someone came in South Bend and tied them up. No, Minnesota didn't win, but they didn't lose either. They celebrated like they won anyway. Nagurski took over the fullback position for the 28 and 29 season and dominated college football. He earned consensus All-American for 29 as well as first team All-Big Ten. I think the football world braced itself for another top star getting picked up by the NFL. University of Chicago coach Stagg told him after a game in the 28 season to not become another Red Grange and that you shouldn't be paid to play football. Well, the Bronco was a huge fan of Red Grange, so that advice fell on deaf ears. Red Grange may have lost the cutting ability and elusiveness that defined his name, but he was no less a great football player. Even still, with all of the injuries he sustained, the nearly bankrupt Bears did their best to prepare him for each game. A makeshift, nearly piecemeal knee brace was custom made for Grange, and he was covered nearly from shoulders to toes in tape, from 2 bum shoulders, perpetually broken ribs, and bum ankles, not to mention the degenerative knee that he never got fixed. Even with Halas taking to calling him the galloping mummy on account of all the tape and garb to prepare him for the grueling late 20s NFL games, Grange was extremely effective on the defensive side of the ball, as well as still being an effective tailback for the 29 Bears. The Bears had struggled throughout the 20s, especially sans Grange, but with Grange and a strong offensive line, the Bears hoped to turn things around. Instead, they struggled in close games, as they went 4-9-2 as arch-rival Green Bay coached by Curly Lambeau went undefeated and won the 29 championship. George Halas stepped down as head coach to focus on running the team from the business side, tagging his former college coach Ralph Jones as the second head coach ever for the Bears. The winds of change were coming into the Windy City. Bronko Nagurski had arrived in Chicago, and paired with Red Grange, the NFL was about to find out what a 1-2 power and grace punch the monsters of the Midway were about to be. There weren't as many people in Chicago that were bigger fans of the Bears than Scarface Al Capone. It wasn't uncommon to spot Capone and his goons in the stands at Wrigley Field, catching rivalry games against the Packers quite frequently. Halfway through the Bronx rookie season, and he already had built himself a reputation as the game's toughest player. On November 9, 1930, the Bears hosted the undefeated Packers. The Bears hadn't beat the Pack in a few years and hoped to turn the page with the backfield tandem of Nagurski and Red Grange. It was a tough grind-out game in which the Bears force-fed the Bronc as the Ghost's knee was badly hurt. With 2 minutes left in the game and the Bears down 7, Nagurski carried the ball 8 straight times to take the Bears down to the Green Bay 2-yard line. Bronco got the ball again, and with his head down and running at full momentum, he plowed right into the outfield wall at full speed, knocking himself silly in the process, and cracking the brick wall. Nagurski staggered but stayed on his feet. Rubber-legged, he managed to gather himself and trotted back to his sideline. Trafton, who was jogging alongside him, said, "You all right, Bronc?" "Yeah, Traff," Nagurski replied, "but that last guy hit me pretty damn hard." Trafton laughed. "Damn, Bronc, that wasn't no player. You just cracked a brick in that damn wall." Instead of celebrating, though, the kicker missed the extra point and Chicago lost 13-12. 6 rows up at the 50-yard line, Al Capone had just witnessed the best sports performance he had ever seen. Despite the loss to the Pack, Halas knew his Bears were a good team and just a couple of adjustments away from being legitimate contenders. 1931 was another good season for the Bears, but with 5 losses, including 2 to the Packers, they missed out again on playing for a championship. Both Grange and Nagurski made the All-Pro team. On October 24, 1931, the Bears lost their biggest fan when Al Capone landed in Alcatraz for tax evasion. The next day, the Bears lost to the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets for their only win of the season. Sometimes things get worse before they get better, but overall the Bears finished 8-5 in 3rd place for 31. The Bears certainly took their lumps on their way to becoming contenders. In 29, Ernie Nevers of the crosstown rival Chicago Cardinals diced the Bears up in a 40-6 victory for the Cards, scoring all 40 points himself with 6 rushing touchdowns and 4 extra points made. This still stands as the greatest individual scoring game for a player in NFL history. Nevers did nothing special except run over the Bears defenders the entire afternoon. Nevers retired in 31, right as Bronko Nagurski was taking off as the new brute force of the NFL. George Crafton's reputation as a fierce brawler took a huge hit before the 32 season kicked off. Crafton was knocked out by future heavyweight boxing champ Primo Carnera in just 54 seconds, in which he was knocked out off his feet 3 times. The Green Bay-Chicago rivalry was already cooking, but it reached another level for the 32 season opener. Before the game, which was played at City Stadium in Green Bay, Packer fans crashed the hotels the Bears were staying at, blowing trombones and drums to annoy and keep the Bears players awake. Crafton grew furious and kicked out every Green Bay fan from the hotel, threatening to break their nose if anyone returned. The next day was the game, and with Green Bay set to kick the ball off, the annoyed and crass George Crafton decided to troll the Packers by kicking the ball off the tee. This immediately started a riot, with Curly Lambeau and George Halas at the 50-yard line cussing each other out, fans storming the field and throwing whiskey bottles everywhere, and Crafton taking swings at anyone who got close. The ruckus was only halted when Bronko Nagurski stepped onto the field with his fist balled. Nobody on planet Earth, and especially in Green Bay, Wisconsin that afternoon, wanted a piece of the furious Bronco, so within minutes the crowd dispersed and the referees conferred to throw Crafton out. This was until Halas threatened to take his team and hit the first train back to Chicago. "Throw him out and we leave," he said. "I have the gate receipts. Don't think I won't take the money and run." The refs decided to allow Crafton to play again after the police on duty said that everyone goes to jail if Crafton causes another riot. This rivalry was now at a fever pitch. The context of this point in time was Green Bay, led by Curly Lambeau, had just won 3 straight NFL championships and had dominated Chicago time and time again in head-to-head matchups the preceding several years. Chicago was turning the corner, and they believed the time was now to change the status quo. This game would be an emotional back-and-forth physical game with neither team scoring and the game ending in a 0-0 tie. In fact, for all of the faith and self-confidence the Bears had, they started off 1932 0-1-3 as they returned to Green Bay 3 weeks later and lost this time. However, this would be their only true loss of the season as the Bears finished 7-1-6 ahead of the 10-3-1 rival Packers. Imagine tying your opponent 6 times. Ties did not count as wins or losses back then, and since win percentage determined the champion, the Bears were the 1932 NFL World Champions. Coach Ralph Jones made good on his promise to Halas they would make the Bears champions in 3 years, provided he stayed out of his way and let him coach. Bronko was named first-team All-Pro, leading the Bears in touches while the Ghost led the team in touchdowns. In reality, I skipped over the first NFL championship game, the 1932 showdown between the Chicago Bears and the Portsmouth Spartans at Chicago Stadium. The 32 championship game was far from glamorous, as Halas and the Spartans owner were both broke in the wake of the Great Depression. Halas could not afford to have Wrigley Field snowplowed and dirt put over the new surface, so he staged a bit of a coup to have the first indoor game ever played. The issue was Chicago Stadium had just had the circus in town and there were elephant droppings all over the field. The Spartans weren't happy with stepping in crap, literally, but Halas was happy to be indoors and saving money. The Spartans' best player, Dutch Clark, was held out of the game due to non-payment from the Spartans. This was noticed right away by Halas. "Where's Dutch?" Halas inquired. "Ain't here, it's none of your damn business," Potsy Clark growled in response. "Just wondering, you should have your best player around for big games," Halas jabbed. Clark yelled out, "Don't worry, George, we got enough fellas to kick your dead ass." Chicago Stadium was technically not large enough to hold an NFL game, but some modifications to the rules were made to make it work for this game. The field was 80 yards, so the playing surface was 60 yards with 10-yard end zones taking up the remaining space. When a team crossed midfield, they were penalized 20 yards to make up for the shorter field. Even without Dutch Clark, the Spartans were loaded with future Hall of Fame talent. Despite that, the Bears were 3-1 favorites, but quickly slipped down to 7-1 favorites with all the mobsters in attendance betting on the Bears. The Bears won 9-0 with the only touchdown of the day coming in controversial fashion. Bronko, after being stopped at the goal line twice before, ran up the middle again. He stopped, he backpedaled, and he threw a pass in the flats of the end zone to a wide open Red Grange. This was seen as an illegal pass by the Spartans, as they argued that Nagurski wasn't the required 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage. Halas saw this as a need to change the rule to open up excitement on offense, and the rule was changed the following year to allow any pass so long as it's behind the line of scrimmage. Now, despite its having its problems, the first indoor game was a success. The fans could almost reach out and touch the players that were so close. The sounds of the game were crisper, the players colliding, they could all feel it. The first indoor game was a massive success for the fans to experience. 1933 brought 3 important rule changes to the game. The aforementioned forward pass rule that made it much easier and more viable to throw the ball was 1. The uprights were moved to the goal line for easier field goals was 2, and hash marks were placed on every field was the 3rd rule. Moving the uprights was a huge change, as the footballs of the time were fatter and more awkward to throw and kick. The ball would also be slimmed down a bit and become more tapered at the ends to look more like our more modern balls. All of these changes were proposed by the Boston Redskins' George Preston Marshall, who had a show business background and readily admitted he knew nothing about football, or at least as much as the other NFL owners. Marshall proposed that the game of football was not entertaining and that in order for the game to become profitable, it was time for changes to be made. The other owners balked at the ideas that Marshall proposed, especially since he knew little about the game itself, but George Halas, noted for shooting down all of Marshall's ideas in previous meetings, agreed wholeheartedly with Marshall. This was a shock to all, especially Marshall. Halas knew that the game needed to be picked up and needed to be more entertaining. Most of Marshall's ideas Halas had already considered. The rules were put to a vote and they passed. Well, I wish I could say that's all they ruled on. Marshall also wanted all black players to be banned from the league, despite there being black players in the NFL since the beginning. There were grumblings, but Halas stayed quiet on this issue. Marshall's reasoning was, how would it look to the white fan out of work to see blacks working, as if black players themselves didn't have families to feed. It was ignorant, but it did pass, and thus for a time, black players were banned from the NFL. Prior to the 33 season, Halas had hit a wall with his partner Sterneman. His partner, who had owned the other half of the Bears team, had been telling Halas he wanted to buy him out of his share of the Bears, as the team was always struggling financially and rarely turned a profit during these early years of the Great Depression. The great barnstorming tour of 25 moneys lasted a good while, but the Bears were flat broke. Sterneman wanted $38,000 for his share, and Halas had nowhere close to that. The Bears were in danger of losing the team and disbanding despite being champions of the NFL the year before, with some of the best drawing card players in the league. Halas quickly went to work trying to come up with the money. Money from all kinds of sources, from family, friends, and a huge unexpected donation from none other than George Trafton's mother, had Halas just $5,000 short of the $38,000 hours before the deadline that Sterneman's attorney had set on the Bears. Right before it was too late, an Antosh Bank loaned Halas the last $5,000 and the Bears were saved for the 33 season, and George Halas was the sole owner of the Chicago Bears. The 33 Bears flew off to a strong start, winning their first 6 games, including 2 wins over the Packers in which Halas outcoached Lambeau to win close games in each. A big reason for the strong start was Halas' eye for talent and the new wave of youth he brought to the Bears. Going into the 33 season, Halas noticed a lot of the veterans were too out of shape or too slow to be on the team anymore. The veterans who were left over were confused as to how he was able to figure out who was dead weight to the team, as Halas roamed the sidelines during practice, considered to be the worst way to evaluate talent. Halas brought the Bears into a room with a single film reel machine in the center. Halas revealed to his team that he had been taping their practices, and for preparation for opponents, the games would be taped and that the players and coaches would be looking over the film to prepare. This was a new innovation that was not previously in football. Of course, today this is used among all levels of football. The 33 Bears team featured several Hall of Famers such as Bill Hewitt, tackles Link Lyman, fullback Bronko Nagurski, and the Ghost at tailback. George Crafton was finally convinced by Halas to give up playing, but he too would make the Hall of Fame. He was still a sideline mainstay, making his presence felt in particular against Green Bay. His voice bellowing out insults could be heard clear across to the other sideline, always making sure good old Curly Lambeau could hear every crass word. Nagurski and the helmetless Hewitt played all 60 minutes for the 33 Bears, who finished 10-2-1 with some strong come-from-behind wins against the Packers and the Spartans, who were their fiercest rivals and had great Hall of Famers on their teams as well. The Bears were the initial Western Division champions and were set for a showdown with the Eastern Division champion New York Giants. Giants coach Steve Owens said to the media of Bronko Nagurski before the game, "The only way to stop Nagurski is to shoot the son of a bitch before he leaves the dressing room." The Bronx believed the best player in the league was the Giants' Mel Hein. Hein was a center and linebacker but had the speed of a tailback. He was considered the very best defensive player of the day, and the Bronx had the utmost respect for him. Hein in turn believed Nagurski was the best player in the league himself. He said, "You tackle him high and he'll knock out your teeth or break your jaw or both. You tackle him low and he'll trample or break your ribs. He's simply the best." Hein and Nagurski put on a show at Wrigley Field for the 33 NFL championship game. More passing than ever was showcased in this game, but both teams used smash-mouth running to get closer to the goal line before throwing passes for touchdowns. The lead changed hands 6 times when the Spartans took the lead in the fourth quarter, 21-16 behind a snazzy lateral play to Hein that fooled the overly aggressive Bears defense. The Bears responded with a heavy dose of Nagurski, but fooled the Giants with a lateral pass for a touchdown with seconds left to take the lead 23-21. The Giants had an answer, however. They lined up to the right of Hein, making him eligible. The Bears felt a sneak was coming. Hein was left wide open, but Giants quarterback Burnett had the ball slip out of his hands. With time for just one more play, Newman threw a pass to Bagaro, who was 2 yards ahead of Hein, who was ready to take the lateral from Bagaro. However, Red Grange saw this coming and tackled Bagaro by pinning his arms to his chest, preventing him from lateraling the pass and ending the game. The Ghosts preserved the back-to-back championships. The Bears celebrated with legal alcohol, with prohibition having ended just a week or so earlier. This could not have come at a better time for the war-torn, bootlegging city of Chicago. During the off-seasons, the Bronx would return to the frozen Great North to wander through the forest timberline that stretched for hundreds of miles, hunting the big game. Bronko Nagurski loved the loneliness of the forest, the contrast to the crowded stadiums that he entertained for years as a Chicago Bear. The Bronx father fell ill after the 33 season. He lost the mill, and so the Bronx looked into ways to make money. This is when he decided to enter the world of pro wrestling, as the promoters were swarming him with interest. Before the 34 season began, the Bears played the College All-Stars in a showdown between the best college players and the champions of the NFL. This was set up by the Chicago Tribune sports editor Arch Ward, who set up the first MLB All-Star game during the summer. It was considered a huge risk to play the game, as most experts believed that the college game was more refined and that the best college players would dominate the NFL. The Bears' George Halas knew this could be huge for the NFL. If the Bears could beat the best from college, it would put to bed once and for all just how good the NFL was comparatively. Well, the college players were all fired up to play the NFL champions, whereas the complacent back-to-back NFL champion Bears couldn't care less about a summertime exhibition game with what they saw as children. The game was sloppy, especially on the college side, who lost several fumbles and missed field goals. They were also terrified of the big Ukrainian Bronko Nagurski. The game ended in a scoreless tie. The college all-stars celebrated. The Bears were just glad it was over so they could drink beers and chase dames. Yes, these were certainly different times, or maybe not so different after all. Scoreless tie or not, the 34 Bears were considered the greatest football team of all time by the observers of the time, and for a good reason. The Bears had a terrific team. Ends Bill Hewitt and Bill Carr were considered the best in football. Link Lyman and George Musso were among the best tackles in the sport, and Uki Miller and Joe Capshaw were all pros at center and guard respectively. Then you had the best halfback rotation in NFL in Red Grange, Keith Molesworth, and Gene Rosani. Of course, the big Ukrainian was at fullback. But the latest Halas prize find was the half-Cherokee Indian Betty Feathers, a true triple threat who once punted 20 times for a 48-yard average, passed for 40 yards, and rushed for a touchdown all in a single game against Kentucky. Yes, times were certainly different, as punting on third down wasn't uncommon. 34 was the first year the Bears played the Packers twice a year instead of 3 times in previous years. This somewhat upset Halas, who loved and hated the Packers but appreciated how passionate the Packers fans were of their team and of football, but loved nothing more than to send them home with a loss. The Bears opened the season beating their rivals 24-10. They then went on a strong stretch of wins, defeating the Reds twice, the Dodgers, Pirates, and Cardinals. I mean, just look at all these baseball names, for a combined score of 131-17. Betty Feathers had a terrific rookie season, and Halas felt a big part of that was his nearly religious adherence to following Bronko Nagurski's blocks no matter what. He'd follow him to the ends of the earth if he needed so, and it was no surprise that he set NFL record for rushing yards, finishing with 1,004 yards on 101 carries, nearly 10 a pop. At 11-0, the Bears traveled to Detroit for the first of 2 games to decide the Western Division champs. The Detroit Lions were the previously known Portsmouth Spartans, who finally went belly up after struggling financially for years. Spartans players were known to race each other to the bank to cash their checks, knowing they could easily bounce if they waited. Despite temporarily shutting down operations, the team still possessed most of their talent from 2 years before when they took the Bears to the limit in the 32 championship game. Stars like Ace Gakowski, Glenn Presnall, Dutch Clark, Father Lumpkin, Frank Christensen, and Ox Emerson were still around. The Lions' strength was their defense, which went 7 straight games shutting out their opponents, still an NFL record today. The 34 Lions Thanksgiving game against the Bears was the first Thanksgiving game, a tradition that still goes on today. A big part of his success was George Richards, who's a radio magnate. Richards set up a 94-station radio network to cover the game. For the first time, millions of Americans across the country could listen to the game while they enjoyed Thanksgiving with their families. Thanksgiving and football are like peanut butter and jelly, and it all started right here with Lions-Bears in 1934. The Lions jumped out to a 16-7 lead, taking advantage of the lack of Betty Feathers and shutting down Nagurski by sending 4 to 5 Lions players everywhere he went. But in the second half, the helmetless Hewitt and Nagurski went to work shutting down the now predictable Lions offense, forcing them to punt over and over. Nagurski was starting to find holes, and the Lions cut down the lead to 16-13 with a pair of field goals. Hewitt then tipped a pass which was intercepted by Chicago guard Joe Zeller, who returned it to the 4-yard line. 3 straight Nagurski runs were stopped for no gain. The whole city of Chicago could have told you what was going to happen next, but apparently not the Lions. Nagurski took the handoff, ran to the middle, stopped, backpedaled, and threw it to a wide-open Hewitt for a touchdown. Detroit University Stadium was dead silent except for the laughter of George Halas. It was the same play that beat the Spartans in the 32 championship game, except it was Grange who caught it and not Hewitt. The Bears now led 19-16 with 2 minutes to go. The Lions responded with a long drive with Clark and Presnall zigging and zagging down to the 16-yard line with 5 seconds left. Clark took the ball from the shotgun, realizing that this would be the last play. He fired a nose-down pass to Presnall. Grange broke for the ball, getting 2 fingers on it and causing its trajectory to change enough that Presnall bobbled and dropped the ball harmlessly to the turf. The Bears won again, and the ghost was swallowed up by the standing room only Detroit fans who beat and threw stuff at him. The Bronco Hewitt rushed over, throwing elbows until the fans backed off. At the bottom of the pile was a bloodied Red Grange. "Get me out of here. I'm too old for this shit." The Bronc carried him out. Due to strange scheduling, the Lions and the Bears would rematch 3 days later. This wasn't great, as their Western Division was already decided, so the Lions had revenge on their mind. While the Bronco was warming up on the sideline, he could feel someone staring a hole through him. The man started walking towards him. He's sporting a wide smile. He stuck out his hand. "George Richards, Bronk. I own these Lions. Just wanted to tell you, by God, you played the best stand football in the history of the league last Thursday." Bronk thanked him, but Richards had a proposition. "Well, son, I will write you a check for $10,000 if you walk away from football and never return again." After several seconds of them staring at each other, Richards crackled, "Shit, son. They'd throw me out of football. Halas would eat me for lunch, but honestly, your retirement is the only way I'd win a championship." The rematch was another network broadcast, but this time the game was at Wrigley Field, where Halas would run the ball at the Bronco all afternoon to a victory. The winning streak was at 18 games. The 1934 NFL Championship would be played at the Polo Grounds, despite the Bears having the better record, due to league rules that dictated that teams switch out every year for title games. The Polo Grounds was completely frozen, and the Bears struggled to get any traction on the icy field. Despite the setback, the Bears led 13-3 heading into the fourth quarter. That's when the Giants turned to powerful back Ken Strong, who carried the Bears defender on his back to 2 quick touchdowns to take the lead 17-13. Behind, the Giants switched to sneakers to get better traction on the ice. The Giants stopped Bronco on 4th and 1 on the following drive, and the New York fans went nuts. The Giants dominated the last 5 minutes of the game, scoring 2 more touchdowns to win 30-13. The game was called a minute early due to the uncontrollable New York fans. The undefeated season was over, and the Bears lost to the sneaker-wearing Giants. After the game, the Giant Strong said the Bears would have won if they had the shoes to play in. The Bears players were devastated, but 1934 had put football on the map for good. The 34 championship loss caused the Bears to implode a bit. Link Lyman, Carl Brambaugh, and Red Grange all retired, with Bronk and Feathers both pretty beat up. 1935 saw the arrival of Don Hudson from Alabama, who figured he was done playing football after college and had plans to open a laundry business with his roommate and the other end at Alabama, some guy named Paul Bear Bryant. 35 saw the Packers beat the Bears twice. The Broncs went down with a hip injury, and thus, as George Richards predicted, the Lions won the championship with the Bronc out of the way. Halas felt the Bears were collapsing, and so he made it a priority to replace a lot of the players for the 1936 draft. The Bears enjoyed a good draft class, with lineman Joe Strider and Danny Fortman both making the Hall of Fame. Joe as a first rounder and Fortman as the very last round pick in the 9th round. Ray Notting was picked up as a free agent from Cincinnati, who picked the Bears so he wouldn't have to tackle Bronco. With the fresh blood talent, the Bears got off to a 6-0 start before the wheels started falling off of the loss to the arch rival Packers, who were eventually the champions, who went on to beat the Boston Redskins 21-6. George Preston Marshall, owner of the Redskins, was critical of the Boston fans for not supporting the team, so he took the team and left for Washington, D.C. The Bronc had been taking pay cuts for years to help the Bears and Halas, and had always went home after the season being owed money. He took up wrestling in 33, and by 37 had established himself as one of the top draws. He became a world champion just 2 months before the 37 season for the Bears, and would have a nightmare schedule to start off the season. 4 football games, 4 wrestling matches across more than 2,000 miles of traveling. The 37 Bears were dominant defensively behind the rejuvenated Bronko Nagurski, with their only loss in the season to the rival Packers. 37 was a rookie season of former TCU Horned Frog quarterback Sammy Baugh, whom Preston Marshall saw as a pioneer of passing and wanted to build the Redskins around. Right off the bat, the plan was made good when Ball started carving up defenses with his accuracy. He could throw from any platform with his awkward sidearm throws that he got from playing baseball. The Bears would win the Western Division, and the Redskins would win the Eastern Division. With the championship showdown scheduled for December 12, 1937 in Chicago, Halas made arrangements for the field to be football ready. Using asphalt burners, a thick coat of hay, and then covering the field with tarp, that led to the absorption and removal of most of the ice, despite the near blizzard conditions. The Bears kicked off to the Redskins, who muffed the ball but recovered at their own 1-yard line. Halas celebrated the great start, but immediately the Bears felt the greatness coming from slinging Sammy Baugh. Sammy called up a fake punt, but told his young end Cliff Battles to run straight to a patch of ice, then cut to the sideline. The play went to perfection as the Bears defenders covering Battles slipped on the ice, and Battles gained 43 yards up the sideline. Ball showed off his passing ability throughout the game, dropping dots all over the field, but Chicago left 14-7 at the half after Ball got ran over by the Bronc and was knocked woozy. But in the second half, the Bears could not contain Ball, who kept directing his receivers up to patches of ice, and the Bears kept slipping again. This time the Skins scored, tying the game up. The Bears answered with a Manx touchdown reception to make it 21-14 that stood for 22 seconds before Ball rainbowed a pass to former Notre Dame star Wayne Milner, who took it to the house for a 78-yard touchdown, tied ball game. Later in the third quarter, Ball jumped into the air, pumped to fake to Milner, but once he landed, threw a wide open pass to Ed Justice to take a 28-21 lead. Slingin' Sammy was playing a gutsy game. Bloodied and battered, Sammy Ball kept picking himself up. He even took a cheap shot punch by Bears Dick Plasman, which caused a mini riot. Ball was no more worse for wear, but Plasman looked like a hamburger meat at the bottom of the pile. The Redskins held on 28-21 with Bronk putting his hand out for Ball, whom he gained a lot of respect for. The Redskins were the 1937 NFL champions. Ball and Halas held an end-of-season meeting where Bronco wanted $6,500, but Halas was offering $6,000. Bronco was prepared to walk away for wrestling, so when Halas wouldn't budge, Bronco retired. Considered the greatest player ever by all his peers, the Lions and Redskins immediately celebrated. The Bears went into a bit of a tailspin without the Bronc, with Halas particularly rattled with him retiring. By the time 1940 rolled around, Nagurski defeated Luthez for another world championship, but the Bears were making moves. A little-known tailback from Columbia University named Sid Luckman was drafted in '39. He was then quickly converted into a quarterback. Bill Osmonsky was a fullback drafted in the first round of the '39 draft as well. They followed that up with the first-round pick in '40 and Clyde Turner, a center and linebacker that George Halas was looking for. But the big get was assistant coach Hunk Anderson, a former Newt Rockne protege who both played and coached for the Fighting Irish. Hunk had a real tough son-of-a-gun type persona, having once knocked out the one and only George Crafton when they were both at Notre Dame. Halas poached the hard-nosed Hunk Anderson from the Detroit Lions. Anderson essentially invented the blitz and was known to use safeties to do it often. In 1939 with the Lions, the Bears' T-formation offense was held scoreless and gained just 56 total yards as Hunk's Lions defense completely shut them down in a 10-0 victory for the Lions. The 1940 Bears with Hunk Anderson won 8 out of 11 games, losing to the Chicago Cardinals, Detroit Lions, and the Redskins 7-3 in controversial fashion when an obvious pass interference call wasn't made. The Bears planned vengeance for the loss, while Redskins owner George Preston Marshall decided to take the papers to taunt the Bears, calling them crybabies and losers. As fate would have it, the two teams would face off in the 1940 NFL Championship game as division winners. The Bears, with converted quarterback Sid Luckman, were too much for the Redskins out of the gate, with the Bears showing off their new pro set offense that immediately broke a 68-yard touchdown rush. Luckman scored on a sneak. Bears Joe's Mancini broke another long run for 42 yards and a touchdown to make it 21-0 in the first quarter. From there, it was a bloodbath, with the Bears going up 54-0 before it was determined that there wasn't enough balls to kick extra points, so the Bears started going for 2. The final score was 73-0, still the most lopsided score in NFL history, playoffs or otherwise. You could say this was the birth of the modern-day taboo on giving bulletin board material, as both teams admitted the Bears were motivated mostly by the trash talk of owner George Preston Marshall. When Pearl Harbor was bombed by Japan, America narrowly turned on a dime to respond. The NFL was filled to the brim with men who were capable of being fine wartime soldiers, and by the hundreds they filed off to join the cause, none other than George Halas himself. Halas decided to re-enlist into the Navy as he told himself he wouldn't miss another war, as in World War I he was relegated to the athletic departments of the Navy. Despite winning the Rose Bowl in 1919, among other accomplishments, Halas felt he needed to further serve his country. The Bears won another title in '41, beating the New York Giants 37-9. They were on their way to a three-peat when Halas sallied off to the South Pacific. He left, naming Luke Johnsos and Anderson as co-head coaches with Pratty Driscoll and Carl Brambaugh as assistant coaches. Even with all of the sudden changes, the Bears enjoyed another undefeated season, going 11-0. They previously went 13-0 and 34. Redskins were once again pitted against the Bears for the 1942 NFL Championship game, and Coach Ray Flatterly had a plan for how to beat the Bears. Just minutes before the game, he slowly walked to the chalkboard and simply wrote 73-0 and circled it. The message was sent. The Redskins hit the field in a rage for revenge. The Redskins shut the Bears' offense, but Bears tackle Lee Artie returned a fumble for 52 yards and a 6-0 lead. Sammy Bowell responded with a 39-yard strike to Wilbur Moore to take a 7-6 lead. The Redskins then scored on a 4th down from the 1-yard line to extend the lead 14-6, and that score held up. Once again, Chicago's undefeated season was spoiled in the final game of the season. Stopped short of a three-peat, the Bears went back to the drawing board. 1943 saw a complete change in the NFL as fans knew it. Nearly 400 NFL players left for the war, with the Cleveland Rams taking a year off due to both owners enlisting. The Steelers and Eagles merged due to teams not having enough players to field a team. To fill out rosters, old stars like Mel Hein, Ken Strong, and Bronko Nagurski returned to playing football. Along with the return of Nagurski, the Bears were able to land Dante Mangini and Jim Benton from the Rams, who were both among the league's leading receptions the year before. Chicago's biggest worry was the military status of star player Sid Luckman. Everyone hoped he wouldn't be called into service before the '43 season ended. If Luckman was to be called into service, the Bears would have activated coach and assistant Carl Brambaugh, who was 35 years old and hadn't played in 5 years. Nagurski's one condition upon returning was that this was going to be his last year playing football. His body was beginning to break down following the greatest football career ever, as well as 3 world heavyweight title wrestling reigns against the likes of Lou Thesz, Strangler Lewis, and countless other wrestling legends from the day. He had wanted to enlist to serve, but an enlistment doctor stopped counting the disqualifying conditions at 7. Hunk Anderson knew it'd be huge to the locker room to have Nagurski in it, and he couldn't have been more right. All of America was talking about the comeback, and plenty of Bears players looked up to the Bronk, especially with the constant stories from George Halas. Bulldog Turner was the center of the Bears during this time, and was a West Texas cowhand who didn't play football until his senior year of high school, after which he didn't get a single college offer and went hitchhiking for scholarships. Not eating for several days as he traveled by train, broke and hungry. Hardin Simmons in Abilene, Texas gave him a chance, and he made All-America as a senior, but he was still a relatively unknown player when Halas drafted him in the first round of 1940. Sid Luckman, on the other hand, was a huge high school star and turned down many college offers, including large under-the-table payouts, in order to focus on academics, to which he accepted Columbia University, an Ivy League school more known for producing leading men in their fields of academics, not really athletics. While at Columbia, Luckman made the dean's list as well as major wins over Army and Yale, 2 of the best football programs in the country at the time. Luckman had to be convinced that Halas was okay enough guy on the up and up before signing the biggest contract ever given out in football, $10,000 for a year. Bulldog Turner, on the other hand, was signed for $200 a game and was happy to do so. 2 men with very different upbringings to 2 different paths to get to the Hall of Fame. Turner was excellent at coming up with plays when Luckman was out of ideas, including the innovation of the halfback draw to beat defenses who were overcommitted to defending the pass, which defenses started to do to defend against the Luckman passing attack. These players were perfect for the time. They both studied and understood the complex 400-play Halas-made playbook, the first team to have a playbook, as well as hold team meetings and film study. Right as Luckman arrived, Halas had a press box telephone installed for play calling. The phone was a great success until the 42 championship game when George Preston Marshall put his band near the press box. When John Zos would pick up the phone, they'd play music. The Bears of course lost 14-6, stopping them from a three-peat perfect season, in which Halas vowed revenge. It would inspire the return of the Bronk, and a season none were soon to forget. The 43 training camp showed that Bronco's speed was completely gone, but he was still as strong as ever and would be used in alliance, where it took 2 strong men to block him, much less move him out of the play. Nagurski's desire to win every play had never diminished either. Nagurski injured several teammates in practice to the point where his best friend and veteran player George Musso, who was about to line up against him, said, "Hey, Hunk, can you find someone else to block this big bastard? I'm too old for this shit." To which the 45-year-old assistant coach Hunk Anderson shoved him aside to prove to his players that he could still take on all comers. It was a huge mistake. The Bronk wasn't going to allow even the slightest embarrassment and instantly put the man on his back when the ball snapped, knocking the tough man out instantly. Previously under the NFL's one platoon system, a player who left the game could not return until the next quarter, but that was changed for the 43 season due to all of the bodies leaving for World War II. This would suit the Bears well, as that meant veteran players like Nagurski could play a while and then take a breather. The 43 Bears were favored to win the championship, and they had a strong team to be sure. Johnny Siegel and George Wilson were the ends. George Musso, Danny Fortman, Bill Dog Turner, Al Hoptuit, Bill Steinkemper, and Nagurski were on the lines. The backfield was comprised of Sid Luckman, Harry Clark, Bill Geyer, Gary Famaghetti, as well as fullbacks Dante Mangini and Jim Benton, both being fantastic subs on loan from the Cleveland Rams. Nagurski was a hero of the season opener against the arch-rival Packers, who were meeting in the opener for the 12th straight year. The sloppy game was tied 21-21 in the waning seconds when the Bears attempted a game-winning field goal. The kick was tipped at the line of scrimmage and then picked up by the Packers, who had one man to beat for the touchdown, Bronko Nagurski, who hit a short burst of speed and dragged him down by the waist. The game ended in a tie. Sid Luckman's toughness could never be in question, but it wasn't just the physical side he was dealing with. Anti-Semitism was widespread during this time. Luckman idolized Hank Greenberg, who was a baseball player for the Detroit Tigers. Greenberg was one of the only Jewish players in the MLB. As a young player in the MLB, Greenberg immediately pressured multiple single-season records such as home runs and RBIs, but opposing pitchers would intentionally walk him to stop a Jew from taking the records. As with Greenberg, Luckman was dealing from the racist jeers everywhere the Bears went. This type of prejudice was new for Luckman, as growing up in NYC, this type of jeering on anti-Semitic behavior was rare. Luckman could dish it out as well as he could take it though, and his constant winning helped disarm critics. By 43, the Bears had won 2 of the last 3 championships with Luckman and went 33-5 in the regular season. So ferocious had Hunk Anderson been to beat the Packers that he sent Connie Mack Berry to mingle with his former teammates and learn what he could. That's when he learned how Buckets Goldenberg always seemed to know where Luckman was going to pass, when Luckman stood straight on passes and stood crouched on runs. With that information, the Bears cruised to a 21-7 win and a 6-0-1 record to start off the 43 season. However, Luckman had hurt his shoulder and was in danger of missing the next game, in which he was going to be honored at the Polo Grounds for his high school and college accomplishments by none other than Mayor LaGuardia. Luckman had to take Novocaine just to raise his arms up, but played he did. Not only did Luckman's shoulder feel amazing, but Giants coach Steve Owen decided to trash the T-formation offense as well as the Bears. Well, I'm sure you know how this might go. Luckman was yanked from the game after throwing 5 touchdown passes with the lead at 35-0. But Associated Press sports writer Sid Feeder snuck into the press box to tell Coach John Zost that Luckman was 2 touchdown passes away from the NFL record. John Zost relayed the message to Hunk, who asked Luckman if he wanted the record. Luckman said nothing, walked back on the field, and tossed 2 more to go along with 44 and 33 passing yards, both NFL records. The Bears shut up the Giants 56-7. Benton and Luckman caught the flu the night before the next game at Washington, with the Bears losing 21-7. That left just the Cardinals to play, with Green Bay just 1 game behind Chicago in the standings. The Bears were battered, sick, and filled with self-doubt after the embarrassing loss to the Redskins. That was when Bronko Nagurski stepped up and asked to be fullback again. After dominating in practice, Hunk Anderson elected to use him sparingly after feigning keeping him on the line where he'd been dominant all season long. The Cardinals were the most wartime depleted of the NFL teams that were playing. They were using naval cadets until Hunk Anderson called a local commander and shut that down. The Cardinals had 18 rostered players compared to 30 for other teams. They had not won a game all season. Point spreads had been invented in 1940 by a University of Chicago math grad named Charles McNeil. The spread for this game was 23.5 points in favor of the Bears, even despite all of the injuries. The Cardinals were motivated by hatred of the Bears and came out pushing the sick and depleted Bears team around, scoring first 7-0. Luckman responded once the Bears checked in at tackle, but the Cardinals jumped back down the field but were stopped by the Bronx twice for no gain. Settling for a field goal, the Cardinals went up 10-7. The Cardinals jumped out to a 24-14 lead before Nagurski finally came in at fullback. The crowd was anxious and ready for the Bronx. Right away, he started chopping the Cardinals' defense down. The Bears dealt with a stacked line, but even still scored with Nagurski from the 1, with Nagurski toting 7 times for 44 yards. The Bears then forced a punt. Faced with 4th downs after subbing the Bronx out, Hunk Anderson would sub him back in each time to convert the 4th down on runs. Luckman called a fake to Nagurski and instead threw to wingback Harry Clark for a wide-open touchdown to take the lead with less than a minute to go. Luckman himself picked off the next pass from the Cardinals, and listening to Bulldogs' turn of advice of stick it up their ass one last time instead of kneeling, he threw a long touchdown pass to George Wilson, nearly giving Hunk Anderson a heart attack. The Bears won 35-24. The Bronx was carried off the field by a swarm of fans, having gained 84 yards on 16 carries in just the 4th quarter. The 35-year-old had done it for the Bears when they needed it most. The day of the 1943 NFL Championship game, the Bears locker room was filled with Bears history. George Halas, George Trafton, Red Grange, Carl Brambaugh, and Ken Cavanaugh. Everyone was in town for the big game, especially since it was against the now rival Washington Redskins led by Slingin' Sammy Baugh, held out at sold-out Wrigley Field. This would be the 4th time since '37 that the Bears and Redskins would meet for the NFL Championship game, with the Redskins up 2-1 in the series. Everyone in the locker room was laughing, playing cards, and having a good time, including owner George Halas. This carried on until about an hour before kickoff until Coach Hunk had enough. "Gents," he said, "I don't mean to hurt anyone's feelings, but we got a football game to play. Our guests needed to skedaddle. That means you too, George." George Halas was proud of his coach, and the room cleared out of visitors. The 43 Redskins lost to the Steagles and Giants twice in a row before winning against the Giants the 3rd time in a tie-breaking game 28-0. 4 games to finally win the East had them a bit worn down. Meanwhile, the Bears hadn't played in a month. The Bears had mostly veteran players, whereas the Redskins were the youngest roster in the league, with the experts considered the greatest quarterback of all time, Sammy Baugh, who in '43 won the Triple Crown for completions, punting average, and defensive interceptions at 11. However, early in the game, Baugh punted a booming kick to Luckman. Luckman attempted to cut to the sideline when Baugh came flying in full speed. Luckman's knee slammed into Ball's head, instantly knocking him out cold. This was near the Redskins sideline, and they erupted into hysterics. The furious Redskins sideline threw racist slurs at Luckman and vowed revenge. Team doctors asked Baugh if he knew where he was, to which he replied Fort Worth. When asked who he played for, he replied the Horned Frogs. He was kept out for most of the game, and the Redskins became a predictable, run-heavy team. Washington was confident they could win. They had beaten Chicago 3 straight times since losing 73-0 in the '40 championship game. But they had just watched their star quarterback get knocked loopy. They responded with a strong run game to take a 7-0 lead. Luckman then replied with a long touchdown pass to Harry Clark to tie the game. Then on the next drive, a heavy dose of Nagurski had the Bears up 14-7 at the half. Well, not before the Bears caught Redskins owner George Preston Marshall on the Bears sideline in disguise, trying to spy on the Bears' plays. By the time team doctors cleared Sammy Bowell to return to the game, Chicago was up 28-7, when Ball was knocked out of the game a second time when he tried to tackle Bronko Nagurski. Luckman ended up setting an NFL record for touchdown passes in a playoff game with 5, and the Bears routed the Redskins 41-21 for their 6th NFL title. Chicago would celebrate long into the night, with George Halas promising that Bronko Nagurski would return for 44, but Bronko never did. Even still, 43 was the greatest comeback ever for an individual player. Papa Bear would return to coaching in 46, with Hunk Anderson and John Zos returning as his assistants. The Bears would win another championship in 46 as well as in 63. Papa would coach until 1967. As of now, he's still the all-time leader in wins, although Belichick is right on his heels, with greats like Nagurski, Red Grange, Sid Luckman, Bill Hewitt, George Trafton, George Musso, Fortman, Feathers, and Uki. These were the monsters of the Midway that put pro football on the map for good, and the man they called Papa Bear led them and the great sport to the huge phenomenon it is now. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. I hope you learned a lot and found this video entertaining as well. I am Hookshot Drew. Be kind and stay tuned for more from Superb Sports Media. Thank you.